This video deals with the inventory count. The focus is going to be on the procedures after the account, but I'll briefly cover the planning and the executing phase as well. So planning would be the first step in the inventory count, and what's important is when the count will take place, the date and the time, where, so whether the inventory is going to be stored at more than one location, as well as the exact location of the inventory within the warehouse. Who's going to be performing this count? What are the makeup of the count teams, as well as what supervision is present? How will the count be performed? And there should be detailed count instructions, as well as the method that the counter should use when performing the inventory. Documents that's involved, the count sheets, as well as the inventory tags. So when you are reading a scenario, you need to make sure that all of these issues are addressed. If it's not addressed, then it would be a weakness. There are 15 procedures as part of executing the account, and I'm going to split it up into 4 different sections. The first would be procedures 1, 2, 3, and 4. And those are the procedures that deals with the staff involved in the inventory count. Procedures 5 to 10 is then specifics on how the inventory count should be performed. Then we have procedures 11, 12, and 13, and that deals with ensuring the completeness of the count. And procedure 14 and 15 deals then with the accuracy. And that brings us to the focus of our video, which is the procedures that takes place after the inventory count. The first procedure, it deals with accuracy, where the supervisor makes sure that he receives the count sheets back and then checks whether the details was recorded accurately. Procedure 2, 3, and 4 deals with complete. First of all, the supervisor must make sure that all the inventory that's in the warehouse has been counted, and therefore he will walk through the warehouse to make sure that all the inventory has been marked or tagged, and therefore it has been counted. Secondly, the supervisor needs to make sure that all the inventory that's recorded in the inventory records has been counted, and he does that by making sure that all the count sheets has been returned. And then lastly, just as a compensating control, the supervisor will also reconcile the list of all the count areas per the floor plan to the inventory count sheets that has been returned. Procedure 5 and 6 is then the additional procedures that needs to be performed. Procedure 5 states that upon completion of the count, the last numbers of internal documents must be recorded to ensure proper cutoff. What this means is that the supervisor needs to make sure that all our sales and our purchases has been recorded into the inventory records before we print the inventory count sheets or before we calculate the variances. If we don't do this, then our variances will be incorrect. So the last invoice must be recorded so that we make sure that all our sales were recorded before the inventory sheets were printed. If sales took place and these sales were not reflected in our sales journal, what do we expect to find? If that is the situation, then the quantity of inventory items on the floor will be less than what is reflected on the count sheet. If we take an example, so invoice 347, which was for 10 loaves of bread, was accidentally not recorded into our sales journal. If we don't look at our count sheet, will show 27 loaves of bread. When we count on the floor, the quantity will only reflect 17, and therefore it will appear that there should be an inventory write-off of 10. However, that is not correct. We need to take into account that invoice that was not recorded. So our count sheet should technically have only reflected 17, which is the 27 less the 10 loaves of bread which was unrecorded. Now, when we compare that to the quantity on the floor, we'll see that there's no inventory write-off needed. The same process should be followed to make sure that all the goods that we've purchased during that financial year has been taken into account into our purchases journal. So, the last goods received note, we check that number to make sure that all the purchases were recorded before the count sheets were printed. If not, the quantity reflected on the count sheet will be less than what is reflected on the floor. An example for this would be if goods received note 395 was not recorded, then we will see that our count sheets will reflect 30 cartons of milk. The quantity on the floor will reflect 42, and therefore it appears that we need to make a positive adjustment of 12. However, if we check the cutoff numbers and we realize that there was a purchase of 15 cartons of milk that was not recorded, our count sheet should have actually reflected 45, which is the 30 plus the 15 cartons of milk, which relates to that unrecorded purchase. When that 45 is now compared to the quantity on the floor of 42, we realize that we should have actually had a write-off of 3. And therefore, it is very important to obtain that cut-off numbers. So it's the last invoice, which represents the last sale that was made, and the last goods received note number, which represent the last purchase that was made. And we make sure that all of our invoices and all of our goods received notes has been recorded, so that when we calculate our adjustment or our inventory write-off, we use the correct figures in the calculation. And that brings us to our last procedure. It says the inventory records must be adjusted to reflect the physical quantities on hand. These adjustments must be documented on inventory adjustments forms, which should be authorized by a senior person. Now, this one control, I can break it up into a few steps. The first one would be that we need to calculate the variance. And you calculate that variance by comparing the actual inventory quantities to the quantities that has been recorded on our count sheets. An independent person then needs to review this calculation, and that review will be done by inspecting the stock sheets, making sure that the cut-off procedures was done so that all the sales invoices as well as the purchases was recorded, and then investigating that difference. The next step would be that the difference must be recorded on an inventory adjustment form, and that inventory adjustment form should also be reviewed and authorized. And then finally, the adjustment can be recorded into the inventory records. The journal that's going to be used to record that adjustment then needs to be reviewed and authorized as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us then to the end of the inventory count procedures.